My whole life, I was treated like I mattered less because my sister was the golden child. But when my parents tried to let her take my place at my own wedding, that was finally the moment everything turned around. I was treated unfairly my entire life because of my golden child sister, and she even tried to walk down the aisle at my wedding. In the end, I finally got my revenge. My parents always favored my sister, and they never really tried to hide it. If she accused me of something, they believed her immediately and punished me for it. But if I accused her, even when I had solid proof, they would give her a lighter punishment and still somehow find a reason to lecture me too. My birthday cake always had to be her favorite flavor, and my parents acted like they had no idea I hated it. They always bought her more than they bought me, and they always took us where she wanted to go, even if the day was supposed to be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and treated me like her punching bag. At first, she mostly ignored me, but things got much worse once we were teenagers. She ended up with no friends, and her behavior got even uglier. Did her friends move away, or did they dump her because she was nasty? I honestly do not know, because we were never close. My parents bragged endlessly about her accomplishments, but they never mentioned any problems she had. Meanwhile, they constantly pointed out my flaws and used them like teasing material. The only reason I knew she had no friends was because we went to the same school, and I noticed she was no longer hanging around anyone. Meanwhile, I was fairly popular. My sister noticed that too, and suddenly, I went from being the occasional punching bag to someone she absolutely needed to destroy. She started accusing me and my friends of all kinds of things. My parents stopped letting me go out with anyone. They would come up with excuses like, "According to your sister, they are not good people," or, "Why are you always trying to leave us? Why can't you just be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from being completely isolated was my extended family. Most of them lived in the same hometown, and I got along well with my cousins, even though there were some age differences between us. At one family gathering, they invited me to go do something with them. I do not even remember what it was. I just remember sadly saying that I was not allowed to go anywhere. When they asked why, little kid me bluntly said, it was because I was not allowed to have friends, since my sister did not have any. That got back to the adults, and apparently, they tore into my parents over it later. I was scolded for lying and grounded for a month, but after that my parents loosened up a little. So honestly, it was worth it. My sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of our extended family, knowing she had no friends, was too much for her. So she demanded to switch schools, and my parents immediately agreed, even though it cost more because the new school was farther away. She did make friends at the new school, but she never went back to mostly ignoring me. After realizing how much power she had to mess with my life, and after getting angry that I had told the family she had no friends, she never let me have peace again. My life stayed difficult. Her friends would come over and bully me, and my parents would dismiss it as light teasing. I never invited my own friends over because my parents were awful hosts, or my sister would accuse them of stealing something, and my parents would believe her. I did become very close to my cousins, though, because my parents never dared treat family that way. Then I got my first boyfriend. I did not want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. At one point we got separated, and he came looking for me to tell me my sister was flirting with him. She had gone over to him in skimpy clothes, batting her eyelashes, and started talking about how awful I was and how much better she was. He was irritated and immediately came to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a completely different version of events. According to her, my boyfriend had tried to flirt with her, but she naturally rejected him because she would never do that to me. Guess who my parents believed? My boyfriend was not perfect, but I believed him right away for a very unkind reason. Remember, I was a bitter teenager, being treated unfairly all the time. I was resentful, moody, and I hated my sister just as much as she hated me. With that out of the way, let me mention appearances, because I had not brought that up yet since it did not seem relevant before. My parents were overweight and showed affection through food, extra snacks, extra treats, all that kind of thing. My sister was also overweight, while I was not. I had always been fairly skinny because punishment often meant no sweets or snacks for me. Obviously, weight is not what matters. Personality is. But my sister, even back then, was already rude and spoiled. Even her attempts at flirting were bad because she had never learned to work for anything. She just demanded things, and my parents handed them to her. Add to that the fact that she did not look like some irresistible fantasy, and even my insecure teenage self did not think my boyfriend would try to cheat on me with her. Still, my parents banned me from dating such a horrible boy. I did try to keep seeing him in secret, but it was difficult, and the relationship eventually ended. I got another boyfriend later, and once again, my sister accused him of flirting with her when he rejected her advances. Again, my parents believed her. I even tried pointing out that this had happened before, but they decided I was incapable of making good choices and kept choosing bad boyfriends. That relationship could not survive the whole Romeo and Juliet situation either, and it fizzled out too. At some point in high school, I ended up with a certain reputation because I was fine with making out with boys and things like that, but refused to have actual relationships. Thankfully, that never got back to my sister or my parents. During all that time, my sister brought one boyfriend home. He was paraded around like some prize, and my parents spent every second talking about how good he was and why I could not be more like my sister and find someone like that. Then he stopped showing up, and suddenly he was a manipulative bastard who had tricked my sister. Oh well, and the unfair treatment kept going. Around that time, she had more spending money and much better curfews than I did. She was free to go anywhere at any time, while I was not. If I pointed that out, my parents would say it was because she was older. But when I reached that age, I still did not get the same freedom she had, and when I pointed that out, they either denied ever saying it or claimed it was because I could not be trusted the way she could. They used my sister's accusations about my boyfriends and friends as proof that I had poor judgment. Time passed, and it was finally time for my sister to graduate. She got into a college that was not especially impressive, and she had no scholarship or anything like that. Again, since I only ever heard the flattering version of her life, I do not know which colleges she applied to or how badly she got rejected elsewhere. What I do know is that her grades in school were bad because whenever she got a B, it was treated like a huge celebration. I usually got good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate mine. Their excuse was that since I always got good grades, what exactly was there to celebrate? Naturally, my parents made a huge fuss over her graduation and promised to pay for everything. Honestly, I was relieved she would be going away. Not that it made my life any easier. She would still come home every other weekend, and somehow things would keep disappearing from my room, or some new issue would appear to make my life miserable. My curfews stayed strict too. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my own graduation. I am only a year younger than my sister. She told me that since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine, so it would be better for me to start working right after graduation and wait until my sister finished university to see whether they could afford to do something for me later. Oh, and if I chose to stay at home, I would have to pay for all my own things, part of the bills and rent. I pointed out that I could get student loans. My mom basically said yes, except no, because they were so caring and I had such bad judgment that they would decide whether a college was worth my going into debt for. I am not even sure how they thought they could stop me from taking out loans, but I did not bother asking. Scholarships were never brought up. They had no idea what my grades were anymore, and never believed in my abilities anyway. I did not even blink. I just said okay. My mom clearly did not expect that reaction and kept crying. Maybe she had hoped I would throw a tantrum so they could use that as an excuse to never help me with college. But I said nothing, except that I understood their position, thanked them for caring, and left it at that. My dad tried the same conversation later, but I also refused to get emotional with him. You see, after a whole lifetime of their terrible parenting, I had zero expectations when it came to my education. I knew they would come up with some reason not to pay for mine and still make my life difficult over it. I never believed they would eventually pay if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a very long time. I could barely go anywhere. My friendships were limited, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did, because I saw college as my only chance to be free. When the time came, I worked my ass off and got a scholarship, not to some Ivy League school, or into something like law or medicine, but it was a good enough program at a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me through my parents, I posted my acceptance on social media at the same time I told them, and I even forced myself to thank them in the post. That way, they could not forbid me from going without having to explain to the whole family why. At first, they were even a little proud and bragged about it. Then, I guess my sister got to them, because they shifted gears and started asking whether I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip that my sister was not doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I would probably do even worse. I obviously did not budge. They were not happy, but they could not really do anything. College saved me. I actually started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited during holidays and things like that. But because they refused to pay for anything, I could easily get out of visiting much by saying I did not have the money. During that time, I made sure not to introduce any men to them, and my sister stopped going to college. I know she never graduated because, if she had, there would have been a huge celebration, and I definitely would have heard about it. She moved back home, paid no bills and no rent, but apparently that was different. My parents said so. Then she started working at the same company as my mom, obviously because my mom pulled strings. This too was presented to me as some great source of pride. Almost there, I promise. I met my husband around this time. You know those people who always say, if I were in that situation, I would have done this or that. My husband is actually the kind of person who really does. I am the type who is meek and a total doormat in the moment, then lies awake later replaying the situation and wishing I had said something witty. I am the kind of person who cries when she gets angry. My husband is the exact opposite. He claps back immediately. He loves drama, and he loves resolving it. He is the type where, if he does not reply to an insult right away, you should probably start worrying, because that means he is planning something worse. He is the one who wanted me to post this, and he even wanted to post it on some revenge board too, though later he decided we did was not quite extreme enough for that. A lot of people were baffled that I ended up with him, but just because I was not capable of acting like him after the way I was raised did not mean I did not love it. I loved that he did what I could not, and he treats people very well, as long as they do the same to him. When we started talking about marriage, we decided we did not care too much about having some huge ceremony. Because of our budget, we would rather spend the money on our dream honeymoon trip to Europe. As for where to get married, his family was spread out, while mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, so we decided to do it there. We were not living too far away, so we could make weekend trips to handle things, and there was some flexibility with work that let us stay in my hometown for short stretches if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. At that point, my parents naturally demanded to meet my man. I wanted to finally grow a spine and refuse, but I struggled. The distance had softened things in my mind a little, and I started thinking, maybe my parents were not that bad after all. Well, my husband looked at me like I had just canceled Christmas when I told him I would at least make sure they were never alone with him. See, he had been preparing for this meeting. He had even bought a high-quality recorder, small enough to hide in his pocket, so he could record everything. He was practically excited, thinking of all the ways he might get to reject my sister's flirting, insult her, and then spread the recording around the family. So off he went, alone and excited to meet them. He came back later absolutely euphoric. Babes, babe, you will not believe what awful thing they wanted. Babe, we can screw them over so badly. There are so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording right away, but he wisely told me it was better if I listened to him explain first. Otherwise, I might misunderstand parts of it. So here is what happened. He went there, and instead of my sister flirting with him, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being sure about him and my judgment and all that, they announced that they were willing to pay for my wedding on one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle. Yes, my parents insisted that my sister would walk down the aisle at my wedding first, wearing a wedding dress. Their excuse was that it was not right for a younger sister to get married first, so it was only fair if my sister at least got to experience walking down the aisle at my venue in a dress with photos being taken. They even said she could have a cake later. At this point, my husband would probably say his part, but I am keeping this as one story. So let me just say he was stunned, completely stunned. He told me later that his brain practically short-circuited when they said it like it was some generous gift. He had a whole list of insults ready to throw at them, but then some evil little voice in his head apparently whispered to string these idiots along. So instead of snapping, he told them He needed time to think and see how I would react, then left before he gave away the plan already forming in his head when he recounted everything to me later, grinning with the recording. To prove it, I was shocked. Time and distance had softened my memory enough that I truly did not think even my parents would go that far. Thankfully, my husband immediately, focusing on revenge, kept me from spiraling emotionally. We had an amazing time brainstorming ways to screw them over. Some of the ideas were ridiculously over the top. Others seemed more realistic. Eventually, we called my husband's much more level-headed brother for advice. Once we explained the plan involving fake venue addresses and all kinds of chaos, his brother scolded us. He admitted he would never be able to talk us out of getting revenge, but he did point out that some of our ideas were too risky and might even get us sued. So in the end, we settled on the most harmless plan. We would act like we agreed, and then simply hire security and refuse to let my sister in. Obviously, if that had been the whole plan, it would not have felt like proper revenge. The rest of it was mostly my husband's work, though he always insists it was all mutual and discussed with me first, which is true. He went back to my parents and told them he had tested the waters and thought I would not go along with it if I knew. However, he personally did not see the issue, and since he did not want the family torn apart, he would be willing to help them pull it off. He pointed out that I hated conflict, so if they surprised me with it, I might not make a scene in front of everyone. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so there was no telling whether I might snap. So he suggested a compromise. If they helped pay for the wedding, that would make me feel even more pressure not to say anything, because not only would both families be there, but I would also feel grateful for their financial help. He said my parents looked shocked, and my fully grown sister literally started skipping with joy like a child. So the arrangement was accepted. Very importantly, my husband also claimed that, because of my bad judgment and all those past boyfriends, I was distrustful and controlling. He said I liked checking his phone to make sure he was not cheating. Therefore, it was absolutely essential that none of this ever be put in writing. I am still so proud of him for using their own words against them. Any discussion about my sister walking down the aisle before me had to happen only in person, so he would go over to their house to talk. And so began months of deception, while my parents and sister thought they were tricking me, when in reality, my husband and I were draining them for every wedding expense we could. Rather than simply paying for the wedding, they kept trying to stay involved, of course. My parents wanted input on everything, including things that actually mattered to me, like the songs and the color palette. My husband would convince them to let some things go, saying he needed to keep me in line. But since we never cared that much about the ceremony itself to begin with, almost everything else was fair game, or so they thought. For example, we would go look at drink and menu options and choose the lowest or second lowest priced package. Then my husband would secretly take my sister there, let her try it, and sigh dramatically about how it was such a pity we did not want to take advantage of my parents' generosity by asking for the best. Right on cue, my sister would demand that my parents pay for the expensive option. Then my parents would come to me all magnanimous and tell me not to worry because they would cover it. We did the same thing with the photographer and the flowers. My husband literally handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers I wanted, then sadly said I was leaning toward some uglier, tasteless choice. Cue my parents insisting I should get the flowers I actually wanted, and they would pay for those too. When it came to the wedding dress, we hit one minor snag. My parents wanted me to wear a hideous dress. Okay, not truly hideous, but it was absolutely not my style and would not have looked good on me. We had planned to pretend to agree and simply not use it, but then my mom texted me about the dress, which would have created written proof of part of the plan, so I had to refuse in writing and stand my ground there. My husband went back to them and said he would see what he could do. My sister actually suggested ruining the dress I wanted so I would be forced to wear the one they chose. He pretended to go along with it. Throughout all of this, they kept communication off text. We made sure that kept happening by having me personally reply to my sister whenever she tried to message my husband. That only reinforced the image my husband was building of me as this controlling, neurotic woman, so they never risked writing anything down. Some people might hate the idea of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family, but I am such a doormat that the thought of being painted as this terrifying, controlling person was actually hilarious to me. I encouraged him Maybe I have a warped sense of humor. Oh, and yes, my sister did try to flirt with him during all this, but he acted conflicted and careful to really sell that he was on their side. My husband would pretend to tell them all sorts of things without my knowledge. The one thing he never told them, that we had hired security. It was honestly hilarious. My husband and I had truly considered a courthouse wedding so we could spend our money on the honeymoon. And instead, we ended up with this extravagant, expensive ceremony and barely spent a dime ourselves. We called it reimbursement for emotional damages from my parents. I think, and my husband would absolutely agree, that he enjoyed the whole con more than he enjoyed planning the wedding. I did not think it was possible to see a man smiling at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday on a long drive just to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but apparently it is. Then the big day arrived. The plan my parents, sister, and husband believed they had settled on was this: they would wait until everyone was seated. Since the bride comes in later, they would have my sister arrive at exactly that moment so I would not see her in time to stop it. By the time I realized what had happened, it would be too late and she would already have had her moment. As for my dress, we saved leftover fabric from alterations. My husband took it to my parents' house. My sister still lived with them and showed them the scraps as proof he had ruined the real dress. Then he claimed he had to get back to me because I was furious, and he needed to calm me down. He told them he would see them at the wedding. We also made sure to keep the real security hidden at first. As guests and my parents arrived, they only saw a woman checking names off a guest list. Only after my parents had already settled in did we bring out the actual security guard, a guy who looked like a bodyguard. We instructed him not to let my sister in, and we promised him a generous tip if he followed our instructions and kept quiet. Soon the moment arrived. My parents got a text saying my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad signaled for the ceremony to start. My bridesmaids had already been told to follow his lead, so they did without checking with me. After they all took their places, my dad stood at the entrance waiting for me. Meanwhile, a friend who was not in the wedding party texted me to get ready, so no one would get suspicious if my husband or bridesmaids started messaging me directly. This friend was just as eager for chaos as my husband was, and was perfectly happy not being a bridesmaid if it meant she got to help with the drama. As soon as my dad took his position, the bridal music started. The doors opened, and I stepped out. My dad looked completely stunned to see me. He tried glancing behind me, but from where we stood he could not see the venue entrance, so he had no idea what had happened to my sister. Then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID. It was her. He mumbled something about something coming up and left me standing there. There were gasps and confused whispers all over the room. Right on cue, the friend who was in on the plan loudly asked what was happening. I tearfully lied and said my dad told me it was not supposed to be me there. My husband and I had agreed ahead of time that if my dad abandoned me, I should say that out loud to make him look as bad as possible. The tears were not fake. I was actually hurt and trying very hard not to cry. Then my friend loudly asked, "What do you mean it was not supposed to be you?" So everyone could hear and start repeating it. Then she declared she was going to find out what was going on and ran off, exactly as planned, to create chaos near the entrance and keep my dad from returning in time to stop the ceremony. Eventually, my mom also left. At that point, my father-in-law ran over and took my arm. He had been warned ahead of time that he might need to do that. The sight of him rushing over to me actually made me smile. I walked down the aisle to soundtrack of whispers as people discussed what had happened. Some guests even got up to go look for themselves. When I reached my husband, everything was fine. He comforted me, joked that my sad face was so convincing I deserved an Oscar, and reassured me he would handle my parents later. We got married without any more interruptions. My parents never came back. I noticed plenty of people leaving and returning during the reception, but nobody dared tell me what exactly was happening. Someone whispered something in my husband's ear, and he went outside. When he came back, he looked furious, but quietly told me he needed to go hide before he broke character, and started smiling. Apparently, it had worked even better than expected. Here is the summary I got later from friends, relatives, the security guard, and my husband. My sister had arrived wearing a wedding dress. The security guard refused to let her in, just as instructed. He told her she must be at the wrong venue because there was already a bride inside. Yes, we tipped him very well as promised. My dad tried threatening him and claiming he had never heard of him, so he could not possibly be real security. The guard calmly said he would be happy to call the police, since he was hired by us, and simply doing his job. At that point, my dad realized it was too late to salvage their plan, and started demanding that he let my sister in anyway. Then my chaos-living friend came over and started loudly yelling and insulting my sister and demanding to know what was going on, basically stalling everyone even more. My mom arrived soon after, followed by other people who had noticed the commotion. By then, the wedding plan was dead, and all my parents could do was scramble to control the damage. As people learned what had happened, they were horrified that my parents and sister had even considered pulling something like that at my wedding. People started yelling at them. Naturally, the three of them insisted it was not supposed to be a secret, and blamed my husband. When he was called over, my husband put on the most confused face imaginable and denied everything. In his own words later, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, he denied ever agreeing to such an insane plan. When they insisted he demanded proof. Of course, they had none. All they could show were normal text messages about wedding planning. My sister was screaming and crying, and apparently ended up sitting on the floor kicking her legs like a child. My dad looked like he wanted to punch my husband, but security and several guests held him back. Then they tried claiming they had no proof, only because my husband had told them not to put anything in writing. My husband just laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient. Funny how that works." Then he repeated, "Why would I ever agree to something that messed up?" He tore into them for being horrible parents and said he was not going to let their lies and their stupid plan ruin his wedding. Then he walked right back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but I was never shown the footage since. Those were only for security use. However, some guests recorded parts of the scene, and even that was enough. Watching my parents and sister get torn apart by everyone who came out to see the drama was honestly incredible. After a lifetime of being accused of things and never being believed, seeing them finally get a taste of that same treatment was one of the best wedding gifts I could have asked for. My mom was crying. My dad apparently kept cycling between red and pale white. My sister was still on the floor, screaming and sobbing. They kept insisting my husband was in on it, but people just kept asking the obvious questions. Why would he ever agree to something like that? Where was the proof? And why on earth did they think my sister deserved to do this at my wedding? They had no good answers. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do it. Apparently, my dad had to physically drag my sister up because she refused to get off the floor. Nobody said any of this to me directly that night, probably because I was the bride and not just some random guest for once. But I definitely noticed that everyone was making an extra effort to be kind, excited, and supportive. My husband says the fact that everyone was also enjoying all the expensive food and drinks my parents had paid for probably helped. We had an amazing time. My husband only kept up the fake, thunderous expression for so long before he finally broke into a smile again. After the reception, we went back to the hotel to get some sleep before leaving for our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets too, but we thought that was too risky. They could have canceled them or pulled something else, so we refused. Since then, the three of them have tried contacting me. I refused to answer any calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail, which turned out to be smart. My sister eventually messaged me. I am not going to repeat exactly what she said because it was completely unhinged and barely made sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for humiliating her, called my husband a two-faced snake who had fooled them for months, and said she hoped and was sure he would cheat on me. She even suggested that he was already cheating on me with her. My husband took my phone, screenshotted the call logs, my sister's messages, and the messages from my parents demanding I answer the phone. He also added screenshots of messages they had sent him calling him names and threatening him. Then he sent everything into our family group chat. He kept up his whole, "You are all delusional. I never agreed to anything," routine, and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in the group chat, practically begging my family for help, saying we were being harassed nonstop now. He pleaded with them to stop my parents and sister from ruining our honeymoon after they had already failed to ruin our wedding. He ended it by asking people not to share our location in case my parents decided to send my sister over and claim. He had somehow agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite too. My family assured him they would handle it, and since then we have had peace. My husband is a little disappointed. My sister did not disobey and give him another chance to absolutely tear into her. But we will see how long the peace lasts. All in all, while I would have preferred to have a normal, loving family at my wedding at least once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something deeply meaningful to me, but I also finally got back at them. Extra info, because I get asked this a lot. Do I know why they treated me like this? I have wondered that my entire life, and I still do not know for sure. I tried asking when I was younger, but they would deny any difference in how they treated us and then scold me for being spoiled. So eventually I stopped asking. I have considered a lot of possibilities, but based on everything I have seen, my best guess is this. I was unplanned. It took them a while to have my sister, so she was not just wanted, she was their miracle child after a long wait. But judging by the small age gap between us, I think they did not expect to have another child so soon or so easily. Maybe they were careless after her birth. Maybe they did not even realize my mom was pregnant with me until it was too late. So they were suddenly stuck with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. They were not well off financially either, so the extra expense probably did not help. And maybe they resented me for that. That is just my theory, though. In the end, I have accepted that the reason does not actually matter. What they did to me was wrong no matter what their excuse might have been. Did they really think their wedding plan was going to work? My husband and I actually have a theory about that too. We think they never truly intended to go through with it at first. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely even gets dates. And my parents made my husband that ridiculous offer because they did not want to pay for my wedding. They probably assumed we would never accept, and that by making the offer and getting rejected, they could look generous to my sister while also avoiding spending money on me. But then my husband accepted the idea, and they could not back out without risking my sister turning on them.